So back to the expense form component. To implement validation, first we need to import z from Zod. Now we don't need React, so let's import z from Zod. Now we call z.object to create our schema. In this form, we have three fields: description, which is a string with a minimum of, let's say, 3 characters and a maximum of 50 characters. And of course, these are subjective. Then we have amount, which is a number with a minimum of, let's say, 1 cent and a maximum of 100,000. Now here we can use an underscore to separate the 1,000 digits. This makes our code a little bit more readable. We also have the category field. Now the type of this field is not going to be a string or a number. It's going to be one of many values. So we want to make sure that category is groceries, utilities, or entertainment, and nothing else. For that, we use a different type in Zod called enum. So an enum can be one of many values. So here we pass an array of objects. We want to pass values like groceries, utilities, and entertainment. But we're not going to hard code those values here. We already have them up here. So we're going to replace this array with categories. Now here we have a compilation error because Zod expects the array that we pass here to be a constant or a read-only array. But look at the definition of this array in app.tsx. We declare this as a constant, which means we cannot reset categories to a new array. We get a compilation error, but we can still modify this array. For example, we can call the push method to add a new item in this array. So this is not really a constant or a read-only array. To make this a constant or a read-only array, at the end, we need to type as const. This is just some TypeScript magic. Don't worry if you are not familiar with these techniques. You will learn them as you gain experience building applications with React and TypeScript. And by the way, I also have a comprehensive TypeScript course on my website if you want to learn from me. So back to our expense form array. The error is gone. So we define our schema. Now let's store the result in a constant called schema. Next, we use z.infer to create a TypeScript type. So infer type of schema, and this returns a type which we can call expense form data. With that, we are ready to plug in React hook form. So on the top, we import use form from React hook form, as well as Zod resolver from @hookform/resolvers/Zod. Okay. Now in our component, here we call the form hook, and in angle brackets, we specify the type of our form data, that is expense form data. Now when we call this, we pass a configuration object and set the resolver to Zod resolver and pass the schema object that we just created. So we use the hook form. This returns an object that we destructure. And here we grab the register function, as well as handle submit and form state, which we destructure right away to grab the errors object. Exactly like what we did earlier in this section. Nothing new at this point. So now we need to register each input. So here's our description input. Here we add braces. We call register and pass description and spread the result. One more time, we need to do this for the amount. So I'm going to copy this code and paste it right here. Then change description to amount. And one more time for our select category. Okay, we have registered our fields. The next step is to add the validation messages. So after each input, we need to add a paragraph dynamically. So if we have a property called description in the errors object, then we want to render a paragraph with a class of text-danger. And here we render errors.description.message. Now to save time, I'm going to copy this line and paste it after the amount field. Here we just need to change description to amount. Okay. Now, one last time after our drop-down list. But here we change description to category. Okay, now back to the browser. We get an error saying cannot access categories before initialization. We're getting this error in expense form on line 9, where we create our schema. So back to the code. Look, the reason we get this error here is because in this file, we're importing categories from the app file. Now let's see how we have structured this file. In this file, first we import the expense form, and then we create the categories array. So while we're trying to create our schema, categories is uninitialized. To solve this problem, we need to go back to our app file and move the definition of the categories into a different module. Then we can make sure that our modules are imported in the right order. So back to our project. Here in the expense tracker, outside of the components folder, I'm going to add a new file called categories.ts. So this is just a data file. This is where we export our categories. So now let's go to our app file and remove this line and move it here. Now I don't want to use a named export here. So let's just define a constant and then export it as the default object from this module. Okay. Now that we have the categories module, we need to import it in two places. One is the app component. So we can import categories from the categories module. And also we go to expense form. Now we are not dependent on the categories defined in the app file. Instead, we're going to import categories from this module. Now we should also make the same change in the expense filter because here we have a compilation error. So on the top, we're going to import categories from the categories module. So now we are not dependent on the order of components being created. The categories module exports the categories array, and we can use this array in any component without worrying about the order in which components are loaded. So back to the browser, our form is loaded. Beautiful. Now we need to handle the form submission. So back to the expense form. Here's our form element. Here we should set onSubmit to the handle submit function that we grabbed from the form hook. So handle submit. We call this and give it an arrow function. This arrow function will get executed if our form is valid. So for now, let's just say data goes to console.log data. Okay. Now let's see if our validation messages are working. So submit, good. Now we just need to customize these messages. So back to our schema, where we set the minimum length for the description, I'm going to pass an object and set the message to description should be at least 3 characters. Okay. Now let's submit again. That's better. Now for the amount field, we get a message saying expected number received string. So while registering this field, we need to instruct React Hook Form to interpret this value as a number. So this is where we are registering the amount field. Here we pass an object and set value as number to true. Okay. Now let's refresh and submit again. All right, now we get expected number received, not a number. To customize this message, we go to our schema, and where we set the type of amount to number, we pass an object and set invalid type error to amount is required. All right, now let's see. That's better. Now for category, we get a message saying invalid enum value, expected groceries, utilities, and so on. Now, customizing this is a little bit tricky. So where we define the category, here we pass an object, and in this object, we set arrow map to a function. In this function, we return an object with a message set to category is required. Now, I know this is a little bit tricky. You don't have to memorize any of this stuff. These techniques vary from one application to another, so don't get hung up on these details. Let's just understand the big picture. Now, let's submit the form one more time. All right, now the errors are friendly. So the final part is handling the form submission. So if the form is submitted properly, then we need to notify the app component. So the app component adds the new expense to our list.